Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you'd like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Today, we're going to depart from our usual conversation with format. Dr Glenn Wallis recently interviewed me for his Success ID podcast. He is an executive coach and principal of Glenn P Wallis, which is a boutique coaching consultancy. This was a really fun interview to record, where Glenn and I discussed a number of maverick concepts. Here is the podcast as it was originally broadcast, with gracious permission from Glenn. Keep listening to the end of the podcast to hear my commentary.
Hello, my name is Dr Glenn Wallis, and it's great to welcome you to the Success ID podcast, where we introduce you to leading thinkers, practitioners and contrarians who share their views on what it takes to lead yourself and others successfully. On this week's podcast episode, Judith Germain, leadership mentor, author and leading authority on a concept she calls maverick leaders, discusses the idea of forging your own path as success. Jude's work of nearly 15 years has been centred on willfully independent people, which is just a fantastic title, and how to maximise the benefits from such a mindset, how to lead and manage such individuals effectively, and how we can all develop some of that independent spirit in order to lead yourself and others successfully. We really hope you enjoy this episode of the Success ID podcast. So I'm truly delighted to introduce you to a good friend of mine, leadership expert, author and contrarian, brackets in a good way, Judith Germain. Jude, thank you so much for agreeing to come on to the Success ID podcast. It's fantastic to have you on board.
Thanks, Glenn.
So, Jude, we start every podcast with this particular question, or at least a version of it. The purpose of Success ID podcasts is to help people consider how they might lead themselves and lead others successfully. So what case would you make for forging your own path as success? You know, why would people feel that this might be an important part of, you know, living and leading others successfully?
Okay, thanks for that. It's a good question. I think one of the biggest problems that leaders have today is that they don't really understand like who they are, right, or how to act with integrity. And they see like integrity just as a character trait, whereas I think, yes, it is a character trait, but it's also about who you are as an integral as a person. So the whole individual in how you are at home should be how you are at work. So I think if you're clear about your identity and who you are as an individual, you can be more confident about what you bring to the party and build a reputation on who you are. So I think to forge that success, you need to know who you are as an individual, what it is that you can bring, and how that you can then demonstrate that impact to other people. Yeah, that's really interesting. So the thing that you've said there's several things there that I want to pick up on, but I talk to a lot of leaders in organisations in my role as exec coach, and they'll often say, you know, I feel like two different people. I'm one person at home and one person at work. And so what you're suggesting is that there's something about the integrated nature of your identity and being as close to you, whatever your real self is or your real identity is, both at home, at work, and in whatever context, right? That's right. I think the days have gone by where people expect you to be completely separate. Right. I think we're all a blended person. And I think the way that the world is now, it is too stressful, too much change to really be something different. And I think you said before about authenticity is one of those things that everybody says it and nobody really knows what it means. But if I'm going to be a leader and I want to influence you into following me, then you will only follow me if you trust me, and you'll only trust me if you know who I am. You know, and I find that a lot of leaders, it's like, for example, I do a lot of maverick leadership training in corporations, and one of the questions I ask people is, you know, how do you lead at home? And they just look at me like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, if you're a leader at home, aren't you, as well as at work? And they're like, I never thought of it like that, and that really, as a socialised maverick myself, it really surprises me because I see leaders are role models.
Yeah.
And so, if I had a party with work colleagues and friends, they would recognise who I am if I was being described by either party.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of thinking about it, actually, which is, are people able to describe you similarly, irrespective of context? And if they are, then you're more likely to be coherent, integrated, consistently, you being authentically yourself, whatever the right sort of phraseology is, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. So one of the things you've talked about there, I absolutely recognise in the work that I do, which is people talk about being two different people, being two different types of people is exhausting. And I love that connection that you've just made between, the world itself, particularly the world of work, is stressful enough anyway. So adding an additional layer of, energy that's required is a sort of path to problems, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really cool. You mentioned a phrase there called socialised mavericks, and I know some of the work that you've done because we've talked about it before. For the audience, can you kind of give them a brief kind of overview of this concept that you call mavericks? And I love it as a concept. We had a fantastic couple of conversations last year about it, particularly on your own podcast, which I'll put the links in the show notes. So if I'm listening to this and I don't understand the concept, can you give us a kind of couple of minutes just overview of what that is?
Yes, so since 2005, I've been describing mavericks as willfully independent people. And in my own research, I've noticed that there is more than one type of maverick. So you have socialised mavericks and you have your extreme mavericks. They are similar in the sense that they share the same attributes and similar strategies, but a socialised maverick will work for the greater good. And they'll take all the good stuff about being a maverick and push it outwards. And an extreme maverick will take all the stuff about being a maverick and put it inwards. So one of the biggest difference between the two is morality and intention.
Right.
Does that help?
I think you might need a bit more on that, Jude, because that sounds pretty heavy but interesting and important stuff.
Okay. So if you looked at someone like Donald Trump, he would be classed as an extreme maverick,
right.
more concerned about how things look to him as an individual. So right. Whereas mavericks, both groups of mavericks value loyalty, right? Mm-hmm. Socialized maverick would be like, I'm loyal to you, you're loyal to me. Yep. An extreme maverick is like, you need to be loyal to me. Yeah. And I will dump you if you're in the way. Right. It's that. Yeah. That's the kind of the difference. It's like all mavericks are success driven. It's really important to be successful as a maverick. Yeah. But a socialized maverick will collaborate with you. They'll influence you. But an extreme maverick will manipulate you, and they don't care if you get hurt on the way. Whereas a socialized maverick will never knowingly hurt another person. Right. Yeah. God, that's fun. This is why we got on so well when we chatted about it last time. It's such a clear exposition of this concept, and clearly you've done a lot of work on it over an extended period of time. But I bet there are people listening to this podcast now going, "Oh, I've never thought of it like that. I've never thought of it being called that." And like, how cool is that she's actually kind of distinguished between two versions of that? It plays into. I'm not a great fan, as you've already hinted, of the word authentic, because I think it gets abused in organisations particularly. If I'm authentically a psychopath, are you suggesting I'm authentic? It's just ridiculous. And I think what you're suggesting is if authentically you lean towards an extreme maverick, your independence is harmful, self-oriented, etc., etc. There's some work to do to retain the best of your maverickness, but to use it for good, and that's doable, is it? And if it is, how would you help an extreme maverick sort of transition to a socialized maverick, if that's even doable? It's doable only if the extreme maverick has a compelling reason to change, and that compelling reason has to be driven by them. It's not because you can't say you're hurting people.
Yeah.
So you need to be nice. They'll be like, I don't really care. I'm getting what I want.
Yeah.
If you say you want to be promoted and you're hurting people, so this is how you get promoted, and in that coaching or mentoring or training, you are given clear pathways to the promotion, then they'll do it. So I remember working with one Maverick, and he said to me, gosh, you are sneaky. And that's why he goes, because to me to do what I want, I have to change. And I'm like, yeah. And he went, damn. But he did change because he wanted to be promoted, and it's that kind of, and the flip side is, like, I was doing some leadership training with a group of millennials. So they were between 20 and 25 and 40. Yeah. And when they were going through it, they said, gosh, now I understand. When I'm really, really angry, I go right extreme Maverick. And I didn't realise that's what I was doing, and why I wasn't getting to where I needed to be. And it was like, okay, well, this is the things that you need to do to get back to how you normally are,
Oh, that's interesting. So there's a bit, I know for some of the other sort of personality profiles, they have a phrase called in the grip behaviour, which is, when you are under extreme pressure, you will often revert to the sort of 180 degree opposite version of where you are normally, sort of thing. So if you're, let's say, take an example, introverted, if under extreme pressure, you can become quite extroverted, and vice versa. So there's a suggestion here that pressure impacts how you manifest your willful independence.
That's right. I think you can tell how a socialized maverick is by how quick they'll go to extreme. So when I was younger, you upset me, I was extreme maverick within a heartbeat. With all the consequences that flow from that. Now it's very, I can still retain objectivity and emotion even when I'm annoyed. Right. So I can still, there's always going to be a time when you just go, what? But I found that over the years, it takes a lot longer for me to lose that objectivity and let my emotions completely take over in a moment of madness. And I think that's probably because I see being a Mavericks, it's a continuum, it's a journey. Yeah. And I know that I am much better at retaining the characteristic of a socialized maverick, that it's become almost innate now. Yeah. Whereas other people I know are still on the pathway because they might not go back to extreme in a heartbeat, but they'll get there probably, a couple of hours. I might need to take 2-3 weeks.
Yeah, that's it. So when you reflect on your development from that sort of extreme maverick in a heartbeat to where you are now, more balanced, more it feels like it's a more resilient model for you and more robust in terms of it'll stand more pressure before it kind of cracks. Yeah. What would you say with 2 or 3 key things that helped you make that transition?
It's a good question. I think that the most important one was learning how to influence rather than manipulate. Okay. I think Mavericks are very observant. Mm-hmm. They see weak spots really, really easily. Yeah. And they're quite dominant or a domineering personality, generally speaking. And I think that if you want to achieve, because I remember being, 17, and my boss telling me, he was a Maverick, by the way, socialized Maverick. He said, I'll never promote you. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm the best you've got. And he goes, I know, but you upset people. And I said, yeah, but they get over it. I'm still quite popular. Right. And he said, yeah, but I have to spend 2 days dealing with someone that's crying and it's not on. Right. And I was like, oh, it had never occurred to me that it was a problem. Because I was still popular and people liked me and I still, and I was like, oh gosh. And I remember being 17 and thinking, well, how do I get what I want without upsetting people? Yeah. And then I went down a path of how do I influence people? And I actually literally went out and started to study influence and how that meant. And so for me, that was my first point, is manipulation works, but it only works in for a short period of time, because eventually people revolt, don't they? Yeah. So how do I influence was one of them. And also a lot of self-reflection and really understanding emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and instinct. So I became very observant of things like body language and stuff like that, and saying, oh, when I said this, that person, took a step back. That probably was a bit too blunt. You know?
The fact they're now whimpering in the corner.
Yeah, the thing, it's really difficult because it's about, I find working with Mavericks quite often, it's a bit of a self-awareness, because as a Maverick, Mavericks are concerned about the message, not how it's delivered.
Right.
But I've noticed conformists are the other way around. They care about how it's delivered, not the message.
Yeah.
So if somebody said to me when I was much younger, you know, am I good at my job? When I said no, it would be an honest interpret. I didn't realise that would be offensive, because if someone said that to me, I'd be like, okay, what do I need to improve? It wouldn't affect me emotionally.
Yes.
And I think that's part of it. It's like kind of going, oh, I can't deal with people the way I would like to be dealt with, because they don't want that truth and honesty. It's a bit too harsh.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what how that speaks to things like resilience and that kind of, I suppose there's a bit of ego in there potentially, but there's for Mavericks and those that are sort of forging their own path. There's I'm wondering if there's some of the downsides potentially of that independent streak, right? Is that either you don't seek it, or you have a framework of the world that you are quite comfortable with, and almost you don't need feedback because, you know, perhaps you're holding yourself to your own high standard. You talked about them, you know, wanting to succeed, you know, they're success driven. So I wonder if they, you know, do they typically hold themselves to a very high standard, and therefore perhaps one of the downsides of that independent nature is you don't seek feedback quite as often as you might, and that would actually be helpful and help you develop to be more successful.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of truth in that, and I think it also depends again on the type of maverick. So an extreme maverick is all about themselves and they're more domineering, so they're likely to make mistakes because they don't consult other people, and they believe they're always right, and they tend to miss the red flags that you're going the wrong way. So they can become mistrusted, and they could get a reputation for being reckless. And I think socialized mavericks, it's that learning how to elicit the feedback that's going to be useful. Because they would listen to it, but they may dismiss it, but they will listen to it. But it's not, sometimes if they're still in that kind of socializing stage, they may request the information in a way that puts people off giving it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess also if their past behaviours are potential indicators of future behaviour, then people might be wary about giving it anyway. So does that, you know, you're setting a path or a framework perhaps to inhibit people giving you honest feedback anyway, if you've tended to be a bit acerbic or aggressive or a bit too overly blunt or whatever. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, the power that so let's put ourselves in the position of being a leader of a team. Right? And I was really pleased that you described leading, you know, it kind of irrespective of the wrapper or the context, right? Because at Success ID we talk about, doesn't matter whether you are only leading yourself. In fact, we would strongly urge you to start by leading yourself, but you could be leading part of your community, you could be leading a church, you could be leading a family, you could be leading a team in an organization, you could be leading an entire organization, you know, whatever. It's that willingness to help others, you know, drive performance, etc., etc. Let's suggest for a minute you're the leader of a team in an organization. Why would you want Mavericks on your team, or a Maverick on your team? That's my first question, and then we'll go into things like how would you manage them successfully, you know, and how would you perhaps manage somebody who's showing signs of extreme maverickness. So why would you want one? Let's kind of establish the, you know, why would you want somebody that's strong-minded, got a clear sense of independence, that willful independence that you talk about, which is a lovely phrase. Why do you want those people on your team? What's the upside?
The upside is that they'll stop you from screwing up.
Okay.
Because mavericks tend to be like canaries, so they are months out, sometimes even years out, as to where something's going. So they can clearly see the opportunities, the threats, you know, the whole SWOT note. They can clearly see that. The problem can be in how to take that knowledge back so people can actually hear it. Also, they love change.
Right.
So if you're going to change something, as long as you can convince a maverick there's a good reason to change, so it's not just for the sake of it, they'll be the ones to go, right, okay, this is what we're going to do. They're very good at that. Very novel and curious, and they will. A socialised maverick will have excellent networks. They will be networked in and outside the organisation. So if you want something done quickly, they'll say, "Oh, so and so in finance can do that for you," or they'll have a contact somewhere where you would never imagine that to be, who will just go, "Oh yeah, I can come and help you do that." They're very good influencers. And I would say one of the things that I do a lot now is not just about having a maverick personality, but also getting your team to think like mavericks whilst they're at work, which I call maverick behaviourists, because if you can imagine millennials, or what used to be called Gen Y, early millennials, people, one of the things that people were stressed out about them in the early days was that they were acting a lot like mavericks but didn't have the skill set.
Right.
But there was a small number of those in the workplace, so everybody ignored them.
Right.
But look at them now. Within a year, they're going to be 50% of the workforce is going to be millennials. Right? They're all acting in a maverick way, but they don't necessarily have the skill set to deliver. But they want the things that everybody should have anyway. They want managers they can trust. They want to make impact. They want to make a decision. They want to do all these things, and the corporations aren't set up for that. So they don't know what to do with them. They're like, oh my gosh, but they can't ignore them now because then they're in positions of leadership. There's just too many of them. And I think if you can harness that energy correctly, then you really will become more profitable, more efficient, and more successful as an organisation. Because these individuals aren't like Gen X. They won't put up with rubbish. Do you know what I mean? You need to properly lead them. And you need to be someone that can be trusted, and you need to be respectful, and you can't expect this millennial to do their dues, do this for 3-4 years, then we might train you. It's like, train me today, or I'm going. It's a big difference.
For sure. And so wow, okay, I've got about 150 questions now. So
sorry.
No, really, because this is perfect. What is so? In a typical team of 10, there's no typical team of 10. In a team of 10, what would your experience tell you the average number of socialised mavericks might be in a organisational group of 10?
You may or may not have a maverick in a group of 10, because it's quite a small number.
Okay.
But you would get the majority of people in that 10 would be conformists.
Right.
And then you would have a smaller number of maverick behaviourists. And they're people who will act like a maverick in their area of interest, which is often work. But the thing with them, they're quite interesting because they're quite fragile. So if they're with people that will highlight and value maverick behaviour, it's like you've got your maverick. Do you know what I mean? So you could have easily 4 of those, which would be brilliant.
Yeah.
But if you really push hard on the rules and you don't listen to them, they will become the most conformist you can ever have, but they will be completely disengaged.
Right. That's
do you know what I mean? And these individuals, unlike socialised mavericks, collaborate by default. Maverick behaviourists will cooperate by default, but they can be convinced to collaborate. And what you'll have is, say, out of that 10, you could easily have 4 individuals who are highly influential, reasonably networked. Quite a few of them could be subject matter experts, and they're annoyed, they're looking at leaving, and depending on where they fit, they could be actively looking to stop you from achieving. And that's not I think the latest stat is something like worldwide, there's 87% of disengaged employees. 87%.
Scary, isn't it?
It's just scary. How scary is that?
Yeah. And so that's a really good lesson for leaders, which is, if you're seeing some of that behaviour that you call sort of maverick behaviourists, so all of the upsides of maverick behaviour, well, many of the upsides of socialised maverick behaviour, then actually embracing that, giving people their space to work in that way, encouraging them and supporting them would be the best way of retaining that The danger is if you don't and you shut them down and you get overly processy and overly controlling, that they're likely to be the most disengaged, or a sort of, it feels like the way what you're describing, the phrase that went off in my head was sort of that. They'll get sort of narked about it all, and they'll get kind of frustrated by it all, and then they kind of they just throw their hands up and go, well, if you're not going to do it my way, I'm not going to do it at all, kind of thing. And that's where the disengagement would come, because they don't feel listened to. Would that be kind of right?
Yeah, and I think that you're in a much worse position, because I think a conformist will just follow the rules and do what you say, whereas disengaged behaviourist is like, I really don't care. They're apathetic.
The phrase I was struggling for, Jude, was sort of passive aggressive. So they kind of be passively aggressively disengaged, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think so, but you wouldn't necessarily see it in their behaviour, because one thing, Mavericks are very good at hiding behind a mask if needed.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. What would I do with the other 6, though? On the assumption that they want to improve, and so we're making some assumptions here. But with the other 6, what's the best way for me to get the most positive of the Maverick in willfully independent behaviours out of the remaining group? So we've spoken about supporting and continuing to develop those that are showing those traits, those positive traits. What about those that aren't there yet? How can I encourage them along that kind of continuum?
Another really good question. I would say it's about giving them a compelling reason to change.
Right. Yeah.
And that can be done through peer pressure, through the culture, and also building resilience around things. I think sometimes, like, socialized Maverick leaders are quite good because they can be quite direct.
Right.
So in the sense, but lovingly direct. So in the sense of, you've got a toolbox, you need more tools in the toolbox. If you don't have more tools in the toolbox, eventually you will be surplus to requirements. And it's not like, but not this. This is like the kind of like the blunt version, but it's more like, not today or tomorrow, but the way that the world is going, you need multifaceted, multi-skilled individuals that are always changing, regardless of what age they are, because age isn't really a thing. But if you're going to sit there and just always do the same thing and never learn and never develop and never bring up ideas, eventually you'll be gone, because no organisation can sustain that anymore.
Okay, that's So when I first moved from being employed as I was a teacher when I first left university, 10 years as a teacher, and decided to go out on my own and actually I think sort of display a willful independence, as you would describe it, and set up my own business. This was back in the year 2000. I can't tell you the number of people that said to me, wow, that's a really brave thing to do, or courageous thing to do. And I genuinely, I'm not just being flippant here, it genuinely didn't strike me as either of those things. It was just, I've got a plan, I know kind of what I'd like to achieve. I've really enjoyed my time at school, but I now want a different challenge. Can you talk a little bit about courage and bravery in relation to forging your own path and being different from others purposefully? I mean, we're all different, naturally, but what about being purposely different and the courage and bravery that it might take to do that?
Okay, because I think, personally, I think that if you are ever to lead, you will have to be courageous.
Right.
Courage comes with leadership. And that whether that's courage of your own convictions or your own abilities, and even the need to show the right type of vulnerability is important. And I think that thing with, because you're a socialized maverick without a doubt, and the thing with Mavericks is that they're very self-aware, and they spend time knowing themselves and what they're good at. So it's easy to be courageous when you know that you'll be okay. So most Mavericks that I know will do something that people think are wild, and they'll do it because they know whatever happens, I'm going to be okay. Right. It's that self-knowledge, like, no matter whatever happens, I can handle whatever happens.
Yeah.
So Mavericks don't think they're being courageous, because it's just, well, I need to get over there, so I'll just go over there. It doesn't take courage from a Mavericks perspective, it doesn't take courage to do that, because you just need to do it. They're very pragmatic about, I need to just move over here now.
I mean, I'm laughing because the language that you've used was almost exactly the voice recorder that was going off in my head as you were saying. I'm just going, it's really not. And again, I'm not being flippant or arrogant about it. It was just, that wasn't the way that I tended to think about it. It was, it'll be okay, you know. And again, I'm not suggesting that horrible things don't happen to lovely people. It's just, and I wasn't being again, I don't think I was being blind to the risks. It was just, I've got a thing, I kind of want to give it my best shot and see if I can make it happen.
Yeah, I think it's the confidence of knowing that you have the ability to deal with the consequences. So right. I think people think like Mavericks or true leaders don't really plan, but they do plan, but it's a different way. It's like, so I'm assuming when you decided that you were going to leave and start your own business, you thought about the consequences. What would happen if I didn't get any clients between this point? What would happen if I have to go back to teaching? What would happen? And then you went, I'm okay with all of that.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you knew you'd be okay because you'd thought about it. And I think sometimes other people, like conformists, will take a leap and they will see it as real courage because they have no plan. It doesn't have to be detailed, but they have no idea what would happen if the parachute didn't open.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a Maverick would go, I'll jump out the plane. If it doesn't open, I might break my leg, but that's okay because I've got another one. You know? Do you know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
And I think that's the difference in the mindset.
Right. It reminds me of something that one of our previous guests, Olympian and Paralympian track coach Keith Antoine talked about, which was when I asked him about, you know, what was the biggest takeaway in relation to preparing for success. Actually, he came, as is very often the case with Keith, he went a bit left field and he just went, at some point, you can do all the preparation you like, but you need to ultimately get to a point where you trust yourself. And once you reach the point where you have sufficient trust in yourself, you'll take the step that's needed to be taken to start you on, you know, the process or the path to wherever it is you're heading. So he was really talking about the danger of over preparing, I think, and meeting that point where and I think what you're talking about here is, you know, for people to forge their own path, you know, it's right to do the due diligence around it, but I wonder whether people who do that well don't necessarily do that bit of it any differently, other than when they've got to the point where they've got enough data, they'll perhaps make that decision to trust themselves more quickly than those that don't have that level of self-confidence, perhaps. Yeah,
and I think the difference is that the Maverick won't, when we say plan, we don't really mean like a lot of it. So, for example, like I remember the very first time I did a public speaking event, there was like, I don't know, 1,000 people, and I went with somebody else, and my bit was going to be, I was not the keynote, they were the keynote, so I was only on to be on there for like, I think it was 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and I kind of went to back them up. Anyway, so we were doing the thing, and then at the end of her session, she said, "Oh, I finished an hour and a half early. Can you just like take over?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." Yeah. I've never done a public speech before, but I knew like I was a good trainer, and I knew my stuff. Yeah. So within the time it took to swap mics and walk onto the, and nobody knew that I had, because it didn't feel padded or anything. It was just because I knew, I didn't panic because I knew I'd be all right. And I think that's what it is. You know, the planning of a Maverick might only be 5 minutes, or it might only be the distance between the door and the stage. But because you're naturally always thinking, what could the consequence for this be? What do I need to do? You always have half created plans all the time anyway, so you're just picking one up. This is a plan of, the computer's not working on this presentation. That's okay, because I'll just talk about this instead. Yes. You know?
Yeah, and I think it gives you some that ability to be pretty agile as well, right? And I think there's something about, again, if you can kind of trust that ultimately it'll be okay. It speaks to another concept, which is kind of self-efficacy, that belief that, again, not an arrogant belief, but a deep-seated belief that your efforts will produce a positive result, you know. And I think there's some real strength in Selfefficacy, which talks about trust. In effect, it's the same kind of similar concept as trusting yourself. It's similar to the way that you're suggesting that Mavericks and those that are forging their own path will tend to think about themselves. And I guess that comes from, where does that come from? Is it a learnt thing? Is it an innate thing? I'm asking the question actually, but I'm guessing that a lot of that might be in your upbringing and what you've learned through experience.
Yes, I think when I was writing my book, I was looking at the whole kind of nature nurture thing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to sense check my own opinion before I wrote it down.
Yes.
And I thought about it, and all the what I would class leadership traits tended to be indicated by genes. But what was interesting was it was the nurture that switched them on or off.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that epigenic thing is true, and I think that you might have a proclivity to do something, but how your environment is will make a difference. And I think for me, when I was looking at Mavericks and considering it, I realised that what makes the Mavericks quite different is that they've had early leadership responsibility.
Right.
So whether that means you're the oldest child looking after two other kids, if your parents have all gone to work and you're in charge, or whether you're leading some other activity, all the people I know who have really done I would class as Mavericks have done something at an early age.
Right.
And what they've learned is a lot of emotional resilience.
Yep.
So like in my book I talk about the work from Diane Kutu, and she looks at emotional resilience and says that there's three main parts of it. One is facing down reality, so you're honest about where you're at. There's none of that rose-coloured glasses. Yeah. And then there's also a search for meaning. So it's like, why do this? Why do we need this? What's the point of this? What's the purpose of this? Yeah. And then it's like being kind of ritualized in how in duty that you have, in the sense that a maverick will look at what's around and go, I'll take this and use it for this different purpose it wasn't intended to.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that will make it. But so you don't look at something and go, a pen can only be a pen. Yeah. I might use 4 of those and hold up my book with it. It's that kind of thought about it.
Yeah. So you can see why having people who've got that kind of mindset and the skill set that goes with it, but the mindset and just that willingness to have a go, and the belief that largely it will be okay, even if the result isn't what they want, the actual outcome is still manageable. How liberating that is for people, both as a leader, because you might be in your first leadership job and go, well, other people have done it, so it's doable, right? So I'll give it. It's just like
I'm laughing because that's exactly what you think.
It's like, how hard can it be? I wouldn't say that in my experience of understanding your work and also working with people who I recognise hold some of these traits. I think on the surface, sometimes when they do it a bit clumsily, it can come across as arrogant. And I think perhaps there's a misread there, and perhaps this is something for Mavericks to consider is, how do you manage the external to some extent? And I'm not suggesting you play it down or you overly do that, because again, this is about being real and true. But sometimes I think that you kind of blow people away by your certainty.
Yeah.
And some people can misread that as an arrogance.
Yeah, and or intimidate. They can get intimidated by it.
Yeah, both. I think. Yeah.
I spent many of my early corporate years not understanding why I was being misunderstood.
Right.
And I realised that it was the language. So I used to say things like, I do occasionally, that's really irrelevant. And I mean it in a literal sense, that's irrelevant. But people heard it as, you are saying I am irrelevant.
Right, yeah.
So I learned to say, that's not relevant in this case here. And people would accept that because they didn't see it as part of them.
Yeah.
And also, Mavericks have a pathological issue with being seen as stupid. I mean, it's pathological. I will not be classed as stupid because I am not stupid. Yeah. So they will do everything to ensure that they know what they're talking about. Right. So if a Maverick's unsure, they'll say something like, well, in my opinion, I think. But if they say it is this, it's because they know, absolutely know this is the thing.
Yeah.
Because they've done the research or whatever. And I think a lot of people, when they say I know, they haven't done the depth of the research behind it. So it is an opinion. Yeah. So when they hear a Maverick say I know it's this is what it is, they say that's your opinion. It's like no, I have done 20 hours worth of research. This is right. And Mavericks, you know what I mean? And Mavericks they don't disclose how they think to people, because it's seen for them it's too intimate. If you know how I think, that's really intimate to me, so I'm not sharing that. So therefore you have this big people don't know that you know, because you spent all night researching it, and you're not going to tell them because it's not relevant to them. So they just think you're arrogant, so I know, like for myself, I've learned over the years to say, oh, you might want to try this, or this could be good, and be a bit less certain in my language. And there's some other Mavericks, and it's like, right, we just need to do this, and they're like, okay, let's do it.
And I think there's some real skill in that, and that's regardless, I think, of whether you're a Maverick or not, or anywhere in between. The skill of self-awareness coupled with others awareness, as I call it, is a real art, and I think I certainly think with organisations and individuals within organisations I've worked with, the greater tendency is for people not to say things directly enough. And therefore somebody who's got certainty and confidence, and who is pretty direct, actually, I think when you actually hear them speak, sometimes they're not really that direct or bullish. It's just that they're more straight talking than this rather sort of false harmony that we're trying to strike as a balance in organisations, which I don't think is very helpful either. There's a kind of artificial, I think it's called, somebody called it artificial harmony. I can't remember that should be credited to, but artificial harmony is more, in some respects, more dangerous, but certainly, I would say equally dangerous to being overly direct and overly straight talking.
Yeah, and of course, a Maverick won't put up with that. So, if
would they tend to call it out? So, if they see it, would they tend to sort of go, look, we're just flapping around the edges here a bit?
Yeah, or I must admit, I've been known to say, yeah, it looks like everyone's agreeing, but not from your body language. So what's the truth here? But that has, that's set with knowing the individuals and blah, 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 blah. You wouldn't necessarily do it all the time. But what they do is they observe. So they'll be watching a conversation, and they're observing what's said, how it's said, what the body language is saying, not consciously, just on a subconscious level.
Right.
And the problem for the organisation is if it's something like, if it's a leader that's doing that, then the Maverick will disrespect them. Right. So if a leader's sitting there and he's saying, yeah, everything's fine within the company, definitely not going to be no more redundancy, and everything he's screaming out it's a lie, depending on type of the Maverick, they'll either call it out in front of everybody, or they'll just like, I don't trust you, and you'll never get them to do anything.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Oh, there's just so much. I'm not surprised you've got so much work on, and you're doing so much of this work, because it's a really interesting topic. But there is no doubt that the dynamics that positive Mavericks and positive, people who are willfully independent, it's a lovely phrase, willfully independent, bring to a team, fantastic. When those people don't know how to manage that independent freak, I can absolutely see why the dynamic in a team gets thrown. Leaders not able to kind of cope with that because they don't recognise it as what it is. They recognise just perhaps the outward manifestation of it. I think it's a really, really cool topic. And look, we ask this of everybody as the kind of final question. You've given us so much to think about in relation to forging your own path, being willfully independent, whether you give yourself the label of Maverick or not. You've given us so much to think about, which is awesome. What one piece of advice would you want somebody who's looking to lead themselves or others successfully? What would you want them to take away from what you've shared with us today? Then that's not to undermine everything else. It's not to limit that. It's just, what one nugget would you want people to take away and consider, whether they've introduced enough of it in their lives, or whether they could introduce a bit more, or whether they need to manage it differently, whatever. What would be your one takeaway?
I think it would be to understand maverick leadership, which is who you are. So you bring who you are as a leader and to what you do. So it's not, you don't go to work and you forget who you are. I think it's that you've got to have full integrity. That's in character and wholeness of the individual.
Yeah, that's absolutely cool. That's a super idea to take away. And I think, you know, if our experiences with working with leaders is anything to go by, there are lots of people for whom that's not sufficient. Those two examples are not close enough, and then no wonder they're exhausted. And couple that with the context within which they're leading. That's a super bit of advice. Jude, it's been an absolute pleasure to reconnect and to hear all of your super insights. I'm genuinely blown away by how long you've been studying it and the nuance and the level that you get it out. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's a really cool topic. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great.
Thanks a lot, Glenn. It's been a lot of fun.
Super. Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Success ID podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to and learning more about how you can lead yourself and others successfully. My challenge to you is to take the ideas and wonderful content that Jude's presented here and find a way of putting some of it to work for you and for those that you lead today. Show notes are available on www.successid.co.uk, and to make sure you don't miss another episode, please subscribe to the Success ID podcast on iTunes, Spotify or Stitcher. We look forward to welcoming you to the next episode.
Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my interview with Glenn. One of the interesting things that came up in the podcast that unfortunately we didn't get much time to discuss is the nature of integrity and the fragility of the maverick behaviourists. This is something that I will explore in more detail either in another podcast or via my website, maverickparadox.com. Socialised Mavericks have a very particular integrity. They understand that integrity is about character and intention, as well as a holistic wholeness that speaks of all parts fitting together. True authenticity is also a factor. Socialised Mavericks give equal weighting on both definitions of integrity. They also consider it an integral facet of who they are. They will defend their integrity and let it speak for them on all occasions. This is often why Socialised Mavericks are so highly principled and will stand on their integrity regardless of the consequences. And when conformists are forced due to internal motivation or changing circumstances to become more maverick, they become maverick behaviourists. This means they behave like Socialised Mavericks within their area of interest. Because they are not maverick by their personality, it can become very easy to push them back into conformity, which is very damaging to their self-confidence and engagement levels. And it will also reduce the organisation's productivity and morale of the workforce, potentially to alarming levels. My book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders, goes into more detail on integrity and maverick behaviourist fragility. And you can buy that book on Amazon. If you would like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. The next time, I will be with an interesting guest, ready to explore the mysteries of leadership. Thanks again, and see you soon.